Today we're diving into one of the most dynamic and colorful ecosystems on our planet, coral reefs. These structures might look like underwater rocks, but they're actually alive, built by colonies of tiny animals working together. Coral reefs are not only stunningly beautiful, but they're also biodiversity hotspots that support thousands of species. Let's start with the builders themselves, the corals. Each coral is made up of many polyps, which are small, tentacle animals related to jellyfish and sea anemones. These polyps secrete calcium carbonate to form a hard skeleton that becomes the foundation of the reef. Many coral reef lives as colonies, collected to one another and growing through asexual reproduction. What's amazing is how much small organisms living together can create massive reef structures visible from space. There are two main categories, hermatotypic and ahermatotypic corals. Hermatotypic corals are the reef builders. They contain symbiotic algae called zooxanthellae that live inside these tissues. These algae perform photosynthesis, providing the corals with nutrients, and in return, the corals provide them with a safe home and carbon dioxide. That's why we only find these corals in clear, shallow tropical waters where sunlight can reach them. Ahermatotypic corals, on the other hand, don't contain zooxanthellae and don't form reefs. They're often found in deeper or colder waters. Here we see one of the most fascinating partnerships in marine life, the relationship between coral polyps and their zooxanthellae. These microscopic algae live within the coral's tissues and perform photosynthesis, producing sugars and other organic compounds. The corals absorb some of this energy, which fuels its daily activities. But the relationship goes both ways. The coral provides the algae with protected environments and the carbon dioxide it needs for photosynthesis. Zooxanthellae even help the coral deposit calcium carbonate, reinforcing the skeleton that forms the reef structure. And while it relies heavily on its algae, the coral is still a predator. It extends its tentacles to capture plankton and tiny organisms drifting by, using stinging cells called nematocysts to catch and paralyze them. Corals have other fascinating ways to feed beyond their tentacles. They can actually extend part of their gut, called the mesenterial filaments, outside of their body. These filaments secrete digestive enzymes that break down food on the surface, allowing the coral to absorb nutrients directly through its tissues. Think of it like an external digestion. Instead of swallowing food, the coral digests it in a place almost like unrolling its stomach onto whatever it's trying to eat. This method helps corals capture and digest food particles that might be too large or even too hard to reach for their tentacles. In a nutrient-poor tropical ocean, the flexibility gives corals a huge survival advantage. It means they can take advantage of whatever food happens to drift by, plankton, detritus, or even organic matter released by neighboring organisms. Corals can only grow under very specific conditions, almost like a finely tuned life support system. They need a hard surface to anchor that first tiny polyp, plenty of sunlight for the zooxanthellae inside their tissues to photosynthesize, and warm, stable water between 20 to 30 degrees Celsius. Light is crucial, so most corals grow in clear, shallow tropical waters where sunlight easily penetrates, but not the shallows that gives waves tear them apart. They also require consistent salinity, low sediment in the water, and minimal pollution. Too much runoff or murky water can break light and smooth coral polyps. Because their environmental window is narrow, even small shifts in temperature, clarity, or salinity can stress corals and threaten entire reef systems. Corals produce both asexually and sexually, giving them unremarkable flexibility in how they expand and colonize new areas. Asexual reproduction allows for a single polyp to clone itself, repeatedly forming a colony that grows outwards as a connected network. Sexual reproduction, on the other hand, brings genetic diversity. Many reef-building corals release eggs and sperm into the water at the same time, often in massive spawning events triggered by the lunar cycle. The fertilized egg develop into tiny free-swimming planula larvae that drifts from the currents until they find a solid surface to settle on. Once detached, each larva becomes a new polyp and standing form its own community, adding another building block to the ever-growing reef. Corals are incredibly sensitive to temperature changes, living within one of the nearest thermal ranges of many marine ecosystems. Reef-building coral can only survive in waters warmer than 20 degrees Celsius, but anything above 30 to 35 degrees Celsius causes stress that disrupts their partnership with zooxanthellae. This relationship is the foundation for the coral health. When it breaks down, so does the reef. Areas influenced by coral currents rarely support a new growth, which is why coral reefs are concentrated in tropical land and subtropical zones. A few degrees of warming might not seem like a much, but to corals, it can mean the difference between a vibrant life and collapse. When corals experience stress, especially from high temperatures, they expel their zooxanthellae, losing both their color and many primary sources of energy in a process known as bleaching. Without their symbiotic algae, corals appear stark white and become extremely vulnerable. A short-term bleaching can sometimes be reversed if conditions improve, but prolonged stress leads to death. Although heat is the most common cause, other factors like pollution, sedimentation, wave stress, or even diseases can trigger bleaching as well. During events like El Nino, vast regions of the ocean warm up, causing widespread bleaching that can transform living reefs into ghosty underwater graveyards. Corals demand remarkably stable conditions, which is why they're rarely found near rivers, mouths, or areas where heavy runoff. Freshwater dilutes salinity and can cause stress or kill corals, while sediment from land can settle on the polyps, blocking the sunlight and clogging feeding structures. Even increased wave action can stir up sediments that cloud the water and reduces photosynthesis for zooxanthellae. Healthy reefs rely on clear, well-circulating water where nutrients are low and sunlight is abundant. Even small amounts of pollution can actually harm coral reefs, making them one of the most pollution-sensitive ecosystems on Earth. Fertilizers and sewage runoff increase nutrient levels, promoting algae growth that competes with and smothers coral colonies. Oil, heavy metals, and plastic contaminants can also disrupt coral reproduction and growth. When seaweeds take over, they block sunlight from reaching the zooxanthellae and prevent coral larvae from settling. The result is a gradual shift from thriving coral-dominated reefs to an algal wetland. Coral colonies come in an incredibly variety of shapes and sizes, and these growth forms are largely shaped by their environment. In shallow waters, where sunlight is strong and competitive for spacious spheres, corals tend to grow tall and branching, forming like staghorns and elkhorn coral that stretch upward to reach the sunlight. In deeper or calmer zones, flatter or plate-like corals dominate, allowing them to capture as much light as possible. These structural differences aren't just for show, they shape the reef's entire ecosystem by creating microhabitats for countless fish, invertebrates, and algae. Although we often credit coral for building reefs, they don't do it alone. Calcareous green algae and coralline algae also produce calcium carbonate, helping cement the reef structure and stabilize loose coral rubble. Contributes additional framework. Even sponges and bryozoans help give the pieces together, reinforcing their reef foundation. This teamwork between animals, plants, and protists turns the reef into a living construction site. Every organism plays a role in building, binding, or maintaining this massive underwater city. Coral reefs can be pressed into three main types: fringing reefs, barrier reefs, and atolls. Fringing reefs form closets to the shore, hugging the coastline and often serving as natural breakwater. Barrier reefs develop farther away, separated by land by a lagoon, while atolls are circular reef structures that form in open oceans around a central lagoon. These different reefs types are part of the continuous evolutionary sequence tied to changes in the sea level, volcanic activity, and island erosion. Fringing reefs are the simplest and most common of all reef types, forming narrow bands that run parallel to the shore. Coral growth is strongest on the outer slope where waves deliver oxygen and plankton, while growth on the inner flat is slower because of sediment, freshwater runoff, and pollutants from land. These reefs are often most accessible to people, which make them both scientifically valuable and especially vulnerable to human activity. Many fringing reefs also around tropical islands are struggling with coastal development, highlighting the close connection between land use and reef health. Barrier reefs form further offshore and are often separated from the coastline by a deep lagoon. These reefs can stretch from hundreds of miles, within the Great Barrier Reef in Australia being the largest and most famous example. The lagoon between the reef and the land often collects sediment that builds small islands known as key or cays, creating habitats for birds and turtles. Despite their size, barrier reefs are just as fragile as smaller ones, and they depend on clear, nutrient-poor water to survive. Atolls are circular reef formations that close a central lagoon, often far from any visible land. They can vary from less than a mile to every 20 miles across, and many include small sand islands or cays along the rim. The outer slope of an atoll faces the open ocean and deeps steeply, while the inner slopes is more gradual, enclosing a shallow lagoon, often no deeper than 200 meters. These tranquil lagoons provide habitats for a wide range of marine life, from juvenile fish to seagrass and soft coral. The largest atoll in the world are found in the Maldives and the Marshall Islands. Atolls tell a geological story that fascinates Charles Darwin, who first hypothesized their formation. It all begins with a volcanic activity emerging from the sea surrounded by a fringing reef. Over time, the volcano slowly erodes and subsides, but the coral continues to grow upwards towards the sunlight. As the island sinks between the waves, only the circular reefs remain, enclosing the lagoon that once surrounded the island. This process can take millions of years, turning a once towering volcano into a ring of living coral. Coral reefs are amongst the most productive and biodiverse ecosystems on Earth, rivaling even tropical rainforests in complexity. Yet they exist in waters that are surprisingly low in nutrients. This paradox is possible because the coral zooxanthellae partnership recycles nutrients so efficiently that little is wasted. Physical factors like light, wave action, and water depth combine with biological ones such as competitive and predation to shape every part of the reef community. Every niche is occupied, from grazing urchins that keep algae in check to filter feeders that clean the water column. The reef's balance depends on this tight web of interconnections, where energy flows in many directions but waste almost never accumulates. The waters surrounding reefs are often crystal clear precisely because they're poor in nutrients. Phytoplankton, the usual base of the ocean's food web, is scarce here, so the entire reef relies on primary production of the zooxanthellae living within coral's tissues. The coral provides calcium dioxide and nitrogen through a waste product, and the algae convert them into organic molecules that feed the coral in return. Animals that feed on coral indirectly gain these nutrients, linking even top predators to the microscopic algae within the reef's foundation. Nitrogen-fixing cyanobacteria, along with seagrass, mangroves, and seaweed, further enhance the productivity of reef ecosystems. They capture or produce nutrients that enter the reef's food web as detritus, which is a small particle of organic matter that becomes food for many reef invertebrates. Waste products like nitrogen and phosphorus are constantly reused, keeping the system efficient and balanced. This elegant nutrient cycling makes coral reefs one of the most sustainable natural systems on Earth. The coral reef food web is a masterpiece of efficiency and interdependence. At its base are the producers: seaweed, coralline algae, photosynthetic bacteria, and zooxanthellae that live inside corals. Some corals and their symbionts even supplement their diet by feeding on detritus and plankton. The first level of consumers includes the grazers like fishes, urchins, and snails, detritus feeders like sea cucumbers and worms, the corals or mucus feeders such as the sea star crabs, and shrimp. Above them are the second tier consumers, predators like fish, squid, and snails that feed on their small animals. Even detritus, the organic leftovers from the every level, becomes food again, often coming from nearby habitats like mangroves or seagrass beds. Many reef creatures have evolved to feed directly on corals, showing just how integral these structures are to them in the food web. Coral tissues is consumed by triggerfish, butterfish, parrotfish, sea stars, flatworms, and even snails and sea urchins. Coral mucus, which the polyp secretes to trap sediments and protect themselves, becomes food to the zooplankton, bacteria, shrimp, and crabs. Even fish eggs and larvae are targeted by wrasses, damselfish, and butterfly fish. Their constant feeding pressure might sound destructive, but it actually helps maintain ecological balance by preventing any single coral or species from dominating the reef. Life on a coral reef is a daily competition for space, light, and resources. Corals grow upwards and outwards to outcompete neighbors for sunlight, and some species use their stinging cells to attack or outgrow others. Soft corals and sponges defend themselves with toxic chemicals or release taste that deter grazers. This chemical warfare adds 2 levels of complexity to coral reef ecology. It's not just the corals that compete. Reef animals fight for their place too. Fishes, mollusks, crustaceans, and echinoderms often occupy specialized niches to reduce direct consumption. Some feed only during certain times of the day, while others specialize in unique diet or microhabitats. By dividing resources in this way, their reef supports incredible diversity in a relatively small area. Predators and grazers are essential architects of coral reef communities. Coral-eating species such as butterfly fish and crown or thorn sea stars can shape coral populations, while grazers like parrotfish and sea urchins prevent seaweed from overgrowing the reef. Without grazers, algae would quickly smooth corals, blocking sufficient sunlight and choking the reef's foundation. It's this balance between growth and grazing, creation and consumption, that keeps coral reefs alive. Every bite, every stripe, and every fragmented recycled contributes to the rhythm of one's Earth's most vibrant and finely tuned ecosystems.